Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's event. Good day from the Philippines. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our friends and guests who are joining from different parts of the globe. My name is Daniel C. Ratilla, the Program Head for Climate and Disaster Resilience at the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability and focal point of the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Hub, and I will be serving as your host for today's event. Today, we are officially opening the second of our webinar series for 2026, the Climate Research as If People Mattered series. The title draws from the article Small is Beautiful, Climate Change Science as If People Mattered, written by Dr. Regina Rodriguez and Dr. Theodore Shepard, co-chairs of the My Climate Risk Lighthouse activity of the World Climate Research Program. It reflects on insights from E.F. Schumacher's celebrated book, Small is Beautiful, that may be applied in closing the gap between how climate information is being produced and used. It's been about 3 weeks since we closed the sister series, Climate Voices from the Ground, Perspectives from Different Sectors, where we explored the different contexts and experiences of climate change. And in this series, we will then see how these perspectives inform how we structure our research and management plans. This series is organized by the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub, which is hosted by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. My Climate Risk, or MCR, is a lighthouse activity of the World Climate Research Program, which aims to develop and mainstream a bottom-up approach to regional climate risk. Today's session also occurs on Laudato Si Week, which we mark as the 11th anniversary of Pope Francis' encyclical on care for our common home. This year's theme is From Hope to Action, and so it's incredibly meaningful that our session today will tackle how hope is generated and sustained for mobilizing climate action. Just some reminders before we start. Please note that the program is being recorded on Zoom. On Zoom, all participants are muted automatically as they enter the meeting room. We also encourage participants to keep their cameras off throughout the event, except during the group picture taking. Throughout the session, kindly type in any comments or questions in the chat box here on Zoom. But if you're also feeling shy or would like to remain anonymous, please feel free to send our tech team a private message. Participants through Facebook Live may also type in the comments or their comments or questions in the comments section. And finally, there will be an evaluation survey at the end of the session. Requests for e-certificates may be made through the same form. And at this point, we would like to ask everyone to settle in for an interfaith prayer. I invite everyone to make the sign of their faith or join us in meaningful contemplation. As together we recite Shantideva's prayer. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader to those who journey, a boat, a bridge, a passage to those desiring the shore of non-suffering. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the many creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. And now, to formally welcome everyone to today's webinar, we are delighted to call on our colleague, Dr. Emma Porio, Professor Emeritus at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Ateneo de Manila University. She's also the project lead of Coastal Cities at Risk Philippines and is a collaborator of the MCR Ateneo Hub. Dr. Porio, or Doc Emma,
Yeah.
thank you very much for joining us.
Can I share screen? Okay. All right. Let me see. Can you see my screen? Hello. Hi. Okay. Let me start from the beginning. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Daniel, and the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability team for inviting me here today. Being part of your hub, Daniel, and your climate research has deepened my commitment to researching Earth-attuned livelihoods of people and communities from the margins. This afternoon, let me share with you my experiences in Etbayat Island, Batanes on their sustainable climate adaptation practices. Later, I will share with you my initial field work with the Dumagat Remontados in Tanay, Rizal, and their windmills this summer. In Batanes, I learned that collaborative partnerships, social cohesion, and community solidarity underpins climate adaptation among the Itbayats. In Tanay, Rizal, I learned from the Dumagat Remontados that while they consulted or they were consulted in the introduction of the windmills, a source of renewable energy for them, it did not save them from suffering from the landslide and the flooding that resulted into their communities. In this so let me share with you. If you look at this, these are the Itbayat men bringing the boats, their large boats, uphill in preparation for the oncoming storm. These are the men also collectively and collaboratively building the house. The kogon is 3 layers and could last 20 to 30 years. But lately I learned that the new building code does not allow flammable materials, an example of laws that are not sensitively cognizant of different contexts. I like this because I learned what sustainable fishing in Sabtang side of Bayat. I was so fascinated with the guy's catch. I wanted to buy the octopus, which only cost 200, but he told me that he had to share. Fishermen share their catch with farmers, while farmers also share their harvest from the farms. So, and also in terms of, collective endeavor in terms of sharing labor in the planting of root crops, planting of rice, and building of homes. They also have a collective, food feast, and they use very much nature-based solutions in terms of, organizing the feast. So now let me tell you, if you look at this picture, on the left side, you see the windmills there in Tanay, and then on the left side is scene of Dumagat Remontado settlement, and in between they are doing river ritual. What I have learned basically that in this context, in Itbayat and in Tanay Rizal, I learned that people pursue their livelihood in tune with the Earth's climate rhythms, but it is challenging for them to pursue it with the political, economic, and socio-cultural rhythms of national and local governments, cities, and politics from the central state. Number 2, political economic decisions are decided on the basis of geopolitical considerations and political administrative boundaries, but ecosystem services like water, food systems, etc., follow ecosystem boundaries and considerations. Number 2, consultations and multi-stakeholder dialogue as tools for inclusive and participatory governance are done not so deeply and not so much with integrity. So in closing, let me say that climate research as care for the Earth and humanity has to be pursued with ethics of solidarity and principles of sustainable development, scientific knowledge, and integrity in decision-making, equity and justice, as what UNESCO said in terms of research ethics for climate change. And most of all, I'd like to say, as Lakena 2021 say, that we must do our research with care. Care standing for collaboration, accountability, responsiveness, and empowerment. And most of all, as I tell my students in DRR, our duty is to produce actionable science, science that will be of service to the people on the ground as well as for policymaking. And most of all, we must pursue our research and activity with integrity, knowing that this is what our contribution to humanity and the Earth's life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc Emma, for setting the tone of today's session. I remember fondly your discussion on Yaru in the Itbayat community way back in 2022. So for those who wish to learn more, you can visit our MCR webpage or the AIS YouTube channel for our 2022 series and watch that particular session.
So continuity, di ba?
Yes. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Justin C. is a lecturer in development studies at the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne, specializing in climate change adaptation and mitigation, community engagement, and international development more broadly. His research critically explores the intersections of climate risk, socioeconomic inequality, and political power, with a focus on how communities in the global south are affected by and respond to climate change. He explores the socioeconomic and political dimensions of adaptation projects in areas vulnerable to climate disasters and challenges dominant discourses that highlight technocratic, top-down, and market-oriented approaches. He is a former research fellow at the Sydney Environment Institute of the University of Sydney and at the Centre for Sustainable Communities at the University of Canberra. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Justin C. Dr. C, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll share my screen. Is it showing?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, you're coming in fine.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Daniel, Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, for this kind invitation to present our work. Thank you so much, Doc Emma, for the very inspiring welcome. As always, you always provide us with a lot of words of wisdom. One of the key questions for this series is, what are some of the paradigm shifts that we need to interact with different stakeholders and sectors? So in this presentation, I think this is what I want to contribute into the discussion. I will try to show that the communities that are at the front lines of the climate crisis are not just mere victims. They are doing something meaningful amidst the climate crisis to inspire hope and action. Just a little background about myself. I am a climate adaptation scholar. I've looked at different typologies of adaptation, such as planned resettlement. I've looked at seawalls and hard infrastructure. I've looked at nature-based solutions, particularly in communities in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, as well as in the Pacific. But I'm really inspired by some of the actions that I'm seeing here in the Philippines. So this is what I have written together with colleagues, other disaster scholars. It's currently under review for the journal Climate in Development. So just a disclaimer, I am simply a messenger here. This is not my story to tell. I can tell some people in the room are from Tacloban. These are their stories. And this is a collaborative work with people like Kyra from the ISS, with Pam in UP, with Jin in Lingnan University, with Ara in the UST, with Mona in the University of Plymouth, and with Olivia at the University of the Philippines. So for some context, I'd like to show two figures from the IPCC, which is the global scientific authority on climate change. According to the IPCC, as the global surface temperatures are increasing, you will see in the figure in front of you, there are many reasons for concern. There is very high risk for the following things to occur: unique and threatened systems. There's high risk for extreme weather events. There's high risk for distribution of impacts and other large-scale events. At the same time, there are also different choices and actions that we can take that can either lead us towards climate resilient development, which is in the figure in front of you, the upper right quadrant, okay, where there is low emissions, there is system transitions, there's low climate risk, there's equity and justice. Or it could bring us to the other end, the lower right quadrant here, which is towards high emissions, towards maladaptation, increased climate risk, and ecosystem degradation. Now, the bad news is there is a rapidly narrowing window of opportunity to be able to reach the climate resilient development that we are aiming for. In other words, we are not doing enough. And at the same time, we're looking at Gini coefficient, and we see the darker the orange is, the higher that inequality that exists in a certain community. And income inequality is really widespread. We don't really have to look far. Even near our campus in Ateneo, that area outside the Leola Grand Villa is full of informal settlements. So inequality is everywhere. Climate change is, we're feeling the impacts of climate change. Now, enough with the global maps. Let's look at our own country. This is Tacloban in 2013. I was just here a few months ago with Jean and with Simon, who's currently in the watching here with us this afternoon. So in November 2013, Typhoon Haiyan struck with winds exceeding of about 300 kilometers per hour and storm surges of about 5 meters, killing some 2,600 people and destroying thousands of homes. Tacloban was, in other words, at the ground zero of the disaster. After this, geohazard mapping was conducted, right, by the national government with United Nations Habitat, color coding areas that are prone to risk, while the Tacloban Relief and Rehabilitation Plan blamed the typhoon on the occupation of high-risk areas, okay, by the city's informal settler communities. So two solutions have been proposed. Relocating 40,000 people away from the coast. So relocation is the first solution. And the second solution is the building of a 27-kilometer tight embankment. Okay, 7 billion pesos designed to protect the communities against storm surges. If you're interested about this is our paper, and we've seen how this tight embankment has relocated the poor towards areas in the north where there is very little prospects for livelihood. There's expensive transportation, and so many are forced to come back to the coast. And now there's another project, major project ongoing in Tacloban. It's called the Causeway Project. And the aim is to connect, you will see in the figure in front of you, to connect the airport, Daniel Romualdez Airport, towards to connect it to the downtown area. And environmentalists are warning that this will kill the Cancabato Bay, which is like body of water in between those two areas. And there's also plans for reclamation, in other words, to build a new CBD, a central business district in downtown. And so this is exactly what is going to be affected. It's not just people, it's not just the fisher folks, it's Paraiso, this mangrove eco-learning park. The mangroves in here will certainly be affected if they reclaim the land. Okay? They put soil and, and other things. So this will definitely be adversely affected. So all of this is very depressing. And scholars are saying that this is normal, this is common. A study in Australia found that among a group of 10 to 14-year-old, about 30%, one-third, believed that the world may end during their lifetime due to climate change. A study in Germany showed that although young people are optimistic about their own future, about two-thirds think that climate change threatens human existence. So, together with other scholars, the question is, what are we ought to do here? What role does the social sciences play in a climate-changing world? So to answer this question, allow me to delve into a little bit of theory, okay, and draw from J.K. Gibson Graham's work on research as performative. There are some forms of research, and many of you are familiar with this. For example, participatory action research, they have a political and activist agenda. So, in other words, there's an increasing recognition that all social research is political and world shaping. As Law and Ori argue, social inquiry and its methods are productive. They don't just describe the world, they make the world as it is. They make social realities and social worlds. And so that is the research agenda that I'm trying to forge here to bring into being, within this climate changing world, grassroots initiatives that are more real and more prevalent. Because at the end of the day, we have only two options, right? First is either to present the grassroots in the normal way, the familiar way that always marginalizes them or sidelines them. Or we could go the other way, which is make their transformative potential more real and more legible. And so, what do I mean by the grassroots? Okay, let's go through some theoretical foundations. In this paper, we're defining grassroots in terms of three characteristics. First, grassroots arises in response to social injustices. So there should be something unfair, something unjust for the grassroots to emerge. Second, grassroots challenges the status quo. There should be some notion of transformation embedded within them. And third, it involves some kind of bottom-up mobilization. Now, where did this notion of the grassroots emerge? In the early 1990s, a collection of texts were published which called for fundamental changes to how do we do development. Okay, so this body of text is called post-development theory. It highlights the taken for granted knowledges of development and all of its violence. And why did this emerge? There is increasing awareness of the failure of external models of development, as per the work of Arturo Escobar, right? You've seen how locally and more place-based efforts, in contrast to externally led interventions, have actually worked to embed economies in ecologies. So there's that mutual nation of respect for both humans and non-humans in ethical negotiation. So, what I'm trying to say is the grassroots here, yes, they comprise of social movements like NGOs and other practice-based organizations, but they don't necessarily have to be that, because the grassroots could also be you and me in this room. We are also considered as grassroots. So I hope that this talk resonates with you listening. Now, looking at the grassroots is very important in the context of our current global challenges. Why? There is an increasing awareness in the failure of external models of development, often imposed from the outside by the neo-colonial actors. Solutions are thus beginning to emerge at the grassroots level. My special issue with Anhil foregrounds these grassroots approaches and how they are reimagining development through principles, not of extraction or violence, but through principles of equity, of solidarity, and sustainability. So the goal of the grassroots, the goal is to move beyond simplistic notion of the universe, one world, towards a pluriverse, a world made up of multiple worlds, of multiple ways of being and living, of ways of different place-based knowledges, values, and approaches. So that's my short intro on the grassroots. Now I want to talk about hope. Let's try to unpack hope. And when you think about hope, hope is like this cat looking into the mirror, but it's hard to pin down what exactly it is, right? It's a very complex term. According to Sarah Webb, hope is an emotion, it's a cognitive process, it's a state of mind, it's a disposition, it's a mystery. Okay? And so I don't intend to define what hope is in this presentation. In fact, I just want to point out what it is able to do. But there are different readings of hope that I'm trying to avoid. I think hope could be conceptualized like a spectrum. On the one end, there are paranoid readings of hope. This reading tends to close down possibilities. It finds safety in knowing that bad things will just happen. So, why hope anyway? In Tagalog, wala namang mangyari dyan. Why still hope? But on the other side, there's also hope that is very optimistic, that is quite shallow, that is just people to encourages people to just relax and sit back because good things will eventually happen. In Tagalog, darating din yan. So I am not conceptualizing hope within those two extremes. Okay, I am right there in the middle. I'll show you how I conceptualize hope. But to be able to do this, I want to first answer the question, when? When does hope arise? Well, hope arises when there's a bad present, when there's a lived reality that is shaped by injustice, by insufficiency, by threat, or by unmet needs. There should be a high level of uncertainty. You're not sure whether the outcome will be good or bad, but you still hope nevertheless. And that is exactly what makes hope different from optimism. Because with optimism, you are sure that something good will happen. I have a flight to catch this evening. I am optimistic that I will get there on time, that there will be no traffic in Manila. That's optimism. But with hope, you're not sure whether something good will come out of it, but you still continue to believe in it. So that's when does hope arise. But what does hope do? The second question, okay, what does hope do? Hope can sustain perseverance. It can enable empowerment. It could drive change. So in other words, hope is a mobilizing force. It's a feature that builds up human potential and as such can facilitate transformation. And hope stems from individuals, from communities, from their ability to create, to, to desire, foster an idea of a better future. So in other words, we think about hope, it's also it's about world making, it's about imagining something different. In the literature, hope has been seen as fighting on the side of good, as facilitating emancipation, justice, and equality, especially for the marginalized and the oppressed. And so it is a precondition for transformation. So how do we, my colleagues and I, conceptualize hope? Promise, this is the last conceptual. This is the last conceptual slide. I'll go to the empirical next. How do we envision hope? How do we conceptualize it? We think of it as comprised of two components. On the one hand, there is critique, but on the other, there's also action. So that middle ground there that you can find where the star is in the figure in front of you, that's where we think radical hope lies. First, the first component of radical hope is critical hope. It emerges from dissatisfaction with present conditions of injustice, of harm, of insufficiency. It's a refusal to accept things as they are. Okay? But critical hope is not enough. Okay? Because if you just criticize, it could also lead to paralysis. What's next? Okay? And so this is where the other component of hope comes in, transformative hope. This channels all those negative energy, those critiques into collective action. And so it resonates with a Pajorais notion of capacity to aspire. The idea that hope is not just some vague optimism, but is cultivated through engagement, active engagement with social realities. And similarly, Sarah Wright links this notion of hope with struggle, physical, with struggle, even if outcomes remain uncertain. So this is the last slide of the conceptualization part. So please bear with me. So here are some of the characteristics that we think about radical hope. It is deliberate. In other words, it seeks out the faint signals and distant glimmers of other worlds that might be present. It's deliberate. Second, it's committed. Committed to feel what lurks in the interstices. You feel like there's something there. It's resistant. It pushes back against capitalist logics, against neoliberalism and forms of critique that privilege skepticism over possibilities. And more importantly, radical hope is transformative. It's a source of transformation. It becomes a generative political project that opens space for transformation. So that's how we conceptualize hope. Radical hope as comprised of critique on the one hand and world making, action, engagement, mobilization on the other hand. So we go to some of our research methods. We ask, what does critical hope look like in practice when communities practice it? And so we conducted our own studies. As you can see, the number of authors, the authors are there. I presented them a while ago. We conducted a qualitative, multi-sited case study approach. The authors did their own fieldwork between 2018 2024. Three of the cases are based in Tacloban, while another one is based in Quezon City. And one of our reviewers in the paper were asking us, oh, why focus on Tacloban? And one of the reasons why is because Tacloban, as I said, the ground zero of Typhoon Haiyan 2013, really attracted a lot of interventions. And so also a lot of grassroots organizations working, okay, and hope making in the area. We engaged in several data collection processes like semi-structured interview, workshops, focus group discussion, and participant observation. So for more details, you will see this is 4 different case studies I'm going to present this afternoon. You'll see all the interviews that we've done, focus group, workshops, the different province, the areas, the period of fieldwork. Okay, so without further ado, I will now proceed to the key findings. So first, sorry. So let me just explain how I'm going to structure the findings section. First, I'll talk about the challenges that confront these grassroots movements. Okay. First, I'm going to talk about the challenges that confront the grassroots movements. Second, I'll talk about how the groups or movements are deploying critical hope. Third, I'll talk about how they are enacting transformative hope. So if you remember that the framework of radical hope as both critical and transformative. And I'll show how hope is not just a naive optimism or bed of roses, but it's really a struggle for something better. So as I said, the first case study is really in response to the Causeway project that I mentioned in the earlier part of my presentation. So a loose coalition called Save Kankabatok Advocacy emerged, comprised of local residents, of fisher folks, of scientists, of civil society members in 2022. And I'm calling it loose coalition because, of course, the government will not accredit a group of activists who are opposing the Causeway project. So their mobilization of the Save Kankabatok advocacy revolves around a deep sense of injustice on 2 issues. First, the group argues that the Causeway project will destroy the ecosystem, as you will see a while ago, the Kankabato Bay, okay, that sustain people's livelihood by altering the base hydrology, by increasing sedimentation through reclamation, and destroying the mangrove forest there. But second, the group also emphasizes the procedural and recognitional injustice that are embedded in the project's planning and implementation, particularly the exclusion of communities from decision-making processes. So as one of the interviewees mentioned, the decisions were made without them. The feasibility study was given to the city council only a day before, and they've never seen any environmental certificate. So this is the notion. So this is where the critical hope comes in, right? It's challenging injustices, but at the same time, it's not stopping from there. It doesn't stop there. Save Kankabatok advocacy enacts transformative hope through three ways. First, the group raises awareness through social media and community gathering the bay as a living ecosystem tied to community livelihoods. Second, the group builds solidarity across multiple scales, forming the Kankabato Collective with other NGOs like the PMCJ, Amnesty International in Eastern Visayas, and the Environmental Legal Assistance Center. Third, members engage in formal advocacy demanding state transparency. They've written to the Vice Mayor. They've called for independent audit of contracts and environmental clearances. Now, did this work? Did all of these efforts work? Well, Save Kankabatok's advocacies have achieved small yet meaningful victories. In June 2023, after petitions and lobbying, the Tacloban City Council passed a resolution ordering the temporary suspension of the causeway's construction. DPWH in turn pledged design modifications, including a longer bridge span and addition of a sewage treatment facility. Even the Commission on Human Rights took notice, issuing a statement of concern over the project's threat to Cancabato-based ecosystem and people's livelihoods. So there, I mean, currently, and Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, the construction is now ongoing once again, but at least there's this kind of modifications and notifications from different groups, issues and statements of concern. Second, hope does not have, so first, hope as a struggle, okay? But second, hope does not have to occur on your own. Hope is also relational. You can hope with others. So the second case study is in San Jose, in the same city of Tacloban. After Tacloban, after Typhoon Yolanda, a dominant Build Back Better narrative shaped Tacloban's reconstruction efforts, including the relocation of so many thousands of residents from the coast, which are termed as danger zones, to Tacloban North, which is about 10 kilometers away from the coastal areas. Now, relocations like this have disrupted people's livelihoods, have fragmented their community networks because they were doing all of these random housing lotteries, and also have deepened existing inequalities within the community. You will see some photos taken by Jin during the fieldwork, where you will see a no-build zone. The houses with X are marked for relocation, for demolition as well. So there. Having lost their homes to the typhoon, the residents of San Jose faced additional challenges. Many were barred, so they were prevented from rebuilding in the area because it's now called a no-dwelling zone. And they were also denied humanitarian assistance. Those who sought refuge elsewhere eventually came back, driven, of course, by their ties to the sea. Because they imagine the sea as not only a source of their livelihood, but they see it as kind of a presence whose, the tides, the winds, the storms, all of this they've gotten attuned to. And it has really shaped what it meant for them to stay and survive and hope for the future. However, upon their return, they were met with barbed wires that restricted their access to the very spaces that where the relationship with the sea has been lived and imagined. In fact, one of the respondents said, I wish we should have all just died. I mean, life is harder now after what happened in Yolanda. And so it was during these challenging moments when communities in San Jose that were largely left for themselves as the state withheld housing assistance for those who remained in no-build zones, that they began to explore mutual support mechanisms. One of the respondents said, if we cannot hope for assistance from the government, then we should just help ourselves. And so that's what they did. Their efforts included acts of bayanihan, voluntary mutual assistance to clean their village, to construct transitional shelters. And it is in this process that hope began to circulate through everyday acts of cooperation and care. And so the Urban Poor Associates, one of the NGOs, have noticed this, and that the community is quite strong and quite organized. But mind you, they were not organized before this. That the Urban Poor Associates noticed, and so hope took shape through these entanglements that began with just bayanihan, that extended to Urban Poor Associates. They took them in and crystallized to broader alliances with the church and civic society organizations. And so this is where the Pope Francis Village comes in. Pope Francis Village Project. This is a consortium comprised of the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, CBCP, the Church of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Palo, and the Urban Poor Associates. So the project considered people's need to stay close to their livelihoods and to maintain their social networks in its planning of resettlements. It's a different kind of resettlement, a resettlement that is near the coast another settlement that considers people's networks. And so the site is now not 10 kilometers away as the Tacloban North, but it's about 6 kilometers away from the city center. And it's closer to government-provided relocation areas. And so this has, allowed the residents to remain connected to the sea, to the markets, and to the social networks that are essential to their everyday lives. So that's second. Hope as relational entanglement. Our third case study demonstrates that hope is not just an abstract thing. Hope can also occur physically and materially. And so that's why we're naming our third case study as hope as embodied care. So many of the post-Haiyan recovery efforts largely prioritize immediate humanitarian relief, right? Infrastructures, livelihood restoration, and this has sidelined the psychosocial needs of the youth. Youth-focused activities such as sports and recreation were deemed non-essential compared to food, housing, and economic recovery. And so we claim that this neglect represents a form of injustice. By reducing recovery to simply physical reconstruction, the youth and young survivors were excluded from spaces to process their trauma, to regain their confidence, and to participate in community life. And so this is where Fund Life International comes in. It's a local NGO founded by one of the football enthusiasts who witnessed the city's devastation after Typhoon Yolanda. The NGO uses sports like football to provide education, to provide psychosocial support, and life skills development for the youth. So the kids here are encouraged to assume leadership roles as team captains, as mentors, as junior coaches, learning about leadership and collective decision. One of the interviewees we talked to said, "My personality and interpersonal skills improved. I became more confident in dealing with people." Football also provided as an outlet for people's stress and grief, enabling them to re-inhabit their bodies and communities after trauma. One of the people we talked to said, in the aftermath, I found myself at home, just depressed, nothing to do. This program brought happiness to my life and helped me manage my anxiety and worries. Coaches and peers became, surrogate caregivers. Doc M was talking about care a while ago. And it's exactly this, embodied care, offering stability and support amidst the uncertainties. The program, one of the respondents said, the program gave these kids a chance to talk, a chance to socialize, and play with one another. So that's hope as embodied care. Third case study. Now let me go to my last case study, which is hope as speculative design. Hope can also be enacted, not just through struggle, not just through care, not just through relational entanglements, but also through articulating alternative visions of the future, visions of a good life. And so the last case study takes us here in the National Capital Region of the Philippines. Well, on the one hand, we are experiencing, as you know, intense storms and typhoons. But on the other, the way that we control our flooding is just very messy. Corruption is so intense. And it speaks to the way that we view nature, right? We view nature as something that we need to conquer, something that we need to know, something that we need to control. And this command and control approach to nature has led to all of these infrastructural, technocratic solutions that, as we've seen, have largely been problematic. Some communities are already living with water, and I've learned this through my fieldwork in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. People are already learning to live with water. They're getting used to it. And so money could be better spent elsewhere rather than just building physical infrastructures. And so all of this may want us to go inward and be depressed and be sad about it. But maybe there's another way that we can do and reimagine future in a different way. So this workshop at the University of the Philippines, the demand basically talks about this. In a world where extreme weather events are the norm, how would we imagine housing designs in the future to be like? And so this question was tackled in a workshop with the academics, with designers, and most importantly, students in an attempt to explore creative approaches in post-disaster housing designs. As Ruha Benjamin argues, oppressive systems persist partly because powerful actors monopolize social imaginaries and constrain what futures appear possible. So there's exactly this lack of imagination that this workshop is trying to address. And hope could involve the collective work of articulating and experimenting with alternative ways of imagining and living. So the workshop is called The Other Futures. The workshop first introduced students to speculative design. This is from the College of Architecture. So a climate awareness game was played, short film screenings after, and these helped catalyze conversations about imagined futures. Then, in the kind of a plenary session of the workshop, the students collectively defined a scenario set in the year 2099, so about 100 years from now, let's say, a world marked by perpetual flooding, by water security, and dissolution of traditional gender roles. Now, within this imagined context, the students began to develop characters who inhabited these futures. So students imagined. One student envisioned an AI-driven government representative on letter A on your on the left-hand side of the slide in front of you. It's a commentary on how surveillance and control might evolve in a contract-based society. Another student imagined a resident wearing a transparent backpack containing a plant. And you'll see the green plant behind that supplied oxygen, symbolizing, it's very deep, it symbolizes the entanglement between human survival and non-human life. Another key component of the workshop is the temporary housing design studio. Student teams were given time to create prototypes to represent a climate scenario that they then conceptualized through exercises. So, prototypes are different from prototypes, whereas prototypes are preliminary models of a product that will be marketed for sale. Prototypes are ethnographically rooted and mostly just working artifacts that aim to spark reflection and conversation. The designs varied from above the ground, you will see in figure A there, to underground, letter B. Some of the designs that the team saw were letter A, insect-inspired mobile housing that could run away from floods to travel to other areas. And you see the imagination of the students are so good. Letter B, an underground housing facility that avoids extreme temperature like heat while featuring an overground water collection facility. The third example imagines a future scenario characterized by explosive population growth that makes owning multi-room houses impossible due to the space required. So this has kind of led to a bed spacer society that makes use of communal vertical housing structures like that, figure in letter C, where green spaces at the very top can provoke conflicts and social features, but that these are being monitored and managed by snipers. So allow me to end. What again is radical hope? And we are really inspired by Bonilla's notion of hopeful pessimism. It's an orientation that recognizes the limits of current systems and yet continue to nurture hope through collective action. It's a politics that combines critique of entrenched power with the insistence on the transformative potential of collective hope. There are three lessons that we can glean from our 4 case studies. And let me, in the remaining 10 minutes of my presentation, just try to talk about these different lessons. The first lesson is this. Hope stems from a deep sense of injustice and a disillusionment with expert-led solutions. But still, there's this conviction that action remains necessary. We've seen this in Tacloban, in Save Cancabato Advocacy's resistance to the Causeway Project. Knowing the political forces that are stacked against them, communities nevertheless mobilized to defend the Cancabato Bay. We've seen this in San Jose, how the displaced residents abandoned by the authorities organized themselves to rebuild their homes, to engage in bayanihan through mutual aid. We've seen this in Manila, the participants of the workshop, where they reimagined housing possibilities, even if the future appeared bleak. And we've seen this in Fund Life's program in Tacloban, where they created safe spaces for play and mentorship, despite all the funding limitations and other notions of other challenges they encounter as an organization. Second lesson is this: hope is generated through a do-it-your-own politics, especially emerges when state institutions fail to deliver. Of course, in context in the global south marked by clientelism, by inaction, by corruption, communities on acting on their own can ignite sparks of hope through different repertoires of action instead of formal channels. We've seen this in Save Can Kabatok advocacy in Tacloban, where they mobilize social media for visibility and solidarity. We've seen this in San Jose, where residents chose mutual aid over waiting for assistance. We've seen this in Fund Life, where they created spaces of care to play. And we've seen this through participants of the Other Futures workshop, where they channeled their hope through creative expression to reclaim their agency in uncertain times. Third, hope is sustained through continuous acts where residents directly engage in political processes to defend, repair, and reimagine their worlds. Across our 4 cases, the grassroots movements epitomize hope. Actually, it's a combination of the 4 case studies. It's a combination of struggle, it's a combination of entanglement, imagination, and embodiment. For example, Save Kankabatok advocacy confronted the Causeway Project. So there's the struggle there. They forge alliances with NGOs and the academics. There's entanglement. They articulate a different future for the Kankabato Bay. There's the imagination. Right? So hope is a combination of all of this. For San Jose, the residents resisted relocation, right, to distant sites. There's a struggle. They worked with church groups and NGOs. There's entanglement. They envisioned communities built around solidarity and mutual aid. There's imagination. The third case study, Fund Life, resisted the reduction of recovery to just material reconstruction. So there's the struggle, right? They forge relationships between the kids and the mentors and the coaches. There's entanglement. And they built agency needed to imagine futures beyond trauma. There's imagination there. Finally, the participants of the workshop, of Other Futures workshop, mobilized creative design and speculative storytelling. So there's the imagination. They question existing top-down business as usual futures. There's the struggle. And they cultivate collective experimentation. There's entanglement. These examples show that hope manifests in multiple and overlapping ways, reflecting the heterogeneous realities of global South communities, confronting intersecting crises simultaneously. So it's complicated, it's complex, but that's how it is in a global South context. So just to end, we do not seek to over-romanticize these initiatives or say or imply that they will lead to better outcomes. Because the movements, the grassroots movements that we've examined here, remain constrained by repression and precarity. And as I've said, currently, the Causeway Project is still continuing to be built. And members of the Save Kankabado advocacy are facing harassment and threats. Some have been red tagged as communists because of that. The residents of San Jose, they still live 7 kilometers, it's still far away from the coast. The fund life remains dependent on unstable funding cycles. Right? So crucially, all of these practices of radical hope are not intended, and this is what I want to really assert in this presentation, is that these practices of hope do not justify state withdrawal or shift the responsibility into the communities. We're saying the state should do its job, continue to do its job despite all of this struggle for hope from the communities. Instead, what we're showing is that these are deliberate struggles from communities to demand accountability, to demand justice, to demand better futures. As our 4 case studies show, these groups challenge structural inequalities and they call for responses that are more just, more inclusive, and more attentive to local needs. And so, to end, a climate politics of hope in the global south both operates within and against existing power structures. And they are sustained by a belief that even small actions matter while demanding state responsibility, systemic change, and more equitable futures. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Justin, for presenting that collection of case studies where you really fleshed out what you mean by radical hope and really just how nuanced it is in both imagination and action. Personally, I also really appreciate your framing and defining of radical hope as something that's still rooted in the critique of existing systems rather than what you termed as naive optimism. And so this really speaks to something that I've observed together with my colleagues before, that it's really the stories about optimistic futures rather than those that are rooted in a sense of doom that really engage more of our population to really act on a problem. So that's quite an interesting tie-in with what you mentioned. And so I'm pretty sure that our participants are really bursting with questions. We've gathered quite a few already, and so we hope that we'll have enough time to go through all of them. And so I'd like to start with one of our anonymous questions now, and this really has to do with what you mentioned earlier, that context is always complex in the global south. And the question reads, how differently is the idea of climate adaptation viewed or defined or practiced between the global north versus the global south, if there is any significant difference?
Oh, that's such a very good question from the anonymous uh, participant. Um, Look, I think here's the thing. Depends on what lens you're looking at it. Um, but climate adaptation is now slowly and it's being enfolded in the sphere of development. And what we're seeing is that many development projects that are developed in the global north are being kind of implemented and trialed and pilot tested in the global south. So these are notion of what we call climate experiments. Okay, so to be honest, that's how it is. Those adaptation programs being designed, being conceptualized in the north, but then also being trialed and implemented in the global south, as if there's a template that works for all places all at the same time. So that's where the problem with adaptation happens, and that's where maladaptation comes in. Because as I said, the context matters. And if building seawalls will work in the Netherlands, will work in Japan, it's not necessarily the case with Tacloban. Because one has to understand the local context where interventions are happening. So unfortunately, that's the reality that we're seeing. Adaptation projects that are designed and developed in the global north are being implemented in the global south. Those that are global, so now we are kind of challenging that. Our scholarship, our partnership with NGOs and local communities are what we're trying to foreground is that top-down interventions like that are not enough. That communities are already doing a lot of things on their own to kind of adapt to climate change. So we're trying to change that narrative, that it's not just the transfer of technology, of expertise from north to south that works. Okay, that the north could also learn a lot from what is already happening from the south. I hope that answers the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, thank you, Justin. It's interesting because you mentioned that a lot of these things that we like to implement or experiment with here in the global south might have started as participatory in nature when they were being conceptualized in the global north, but because of their importation it might end up becoming, switching to a more top-down intervention. So it's interesting how there are those dynamics. And um maybe just to muddy the waters a bit, it also speaks to, I guess, the vestiges of colonialism when we talk about, the lasting impacts of climate change in our times. And so I'm going to tie this into one of the questions, and this is from Marvin Tejada, and this is about the existence of the Environmental Impact Assessment System here in the Philippines, or EIA. And despite its existence, why do you think there are such cases, such as in the case studies you've shared, where they still face issues of transparency and accountability? And I guess also to just jump in here, it also sort of resonates with your second lesson in your final slide earlier, that hope is generated when state institutions fail.
So that's a very good question. Um, I think the question should be posed to the government. It's difficult, you know. I also don't understand. While I did my fieldwork in Tacloban, we talked to the city environment officer, and he was saying that all of this environmental impact assessment has to be. He was making a joke when he was saying this. It has to be according to the mayor's flavor, or else it will not get published. So the reason why I think, and I'm taking a political economic lens here, is that EIAs are not just technical products, right? They're not just outcomes of technical things and scientific things. These are also political outcomes as well. And so, you know how politics work, like who would benefit, who does not benefit, should we post it out there, make it public, what are the impacts of that? Um, yeah, it's a political study basically. So if the reason, so I guess the reason why they don't want to be transparent is, it goes back to politics and power.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. And really, from a political ecology point of view, it's, I agree, a really complex, if not muddy process sometimes, despite, being highly technical or in fact idealistic on paper. We know that what's on paper isn't always translated very well into the real world. And, I think the country is a very good case study of that, having such a slew of good environmental laws, but not so much in terms of implementation. And so I want to zoom in on the participatory nature with this question from Maricel Ibita. And these are about the case studies that you presented earlier. Were the results presented back to the community where the researches were conducted, and how did they react or respond? How about policymakers in these places? Were there also any insights from there, or policies that would perhaps um, m- structuralize these hopes?
Thanks, Maricel. Very good question. So there are four case studies there. Um, with Mike, so mine was the first one on the seawall, and definitely we took the time to share the findings. So I remember Jane and I went back. So we did the research previous year. We went back to the following year, shared the findings with the communities. Actually, we held a multi-stakeholder dialogue. So we had the local government, we had the community, we had the NGOs. It was very messy, I would say. Uh, it was so challenging. There were different perspectives, and some of the NGOs are quite vocal. So one of the lessons that we learned is, yes, it's very important to feed it back to the community, but maybe in a more targeted way, and not in a kind of multi-state. It was so hard to be able to manage all of that. But yes, I agree. It's very important to really validate the findings in the field, to ask them if this is what's really happening, because that's the one of the challenges with doing qualitative research, is that you don't have survey findings to show, you don't have quantitative numbers. So what about objectivity? And so this is really the the metric for objectivity, is that to go back to communities to validate whether this is really what's happening on the ground. Now, did we pitch it to the local government yet To be honest, no, not yet. We haven't reached that stage yet. We want to take it one step at a time. I think that we're first still at the level of kind of raising awareness of what radical hope might mean. I mean, there are plans to publish this beyond academia, to more public-facing articles. I think that's the goal first, and then once it has reached people's imagination a bit more, then maybe we can go to that next step of policy. Does that make sense? Like we're taking it one step at a time.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And I just want to latch on to what you mentioned about um, seeing the potential for publishing these things in forms outside of academia. So, do you mean like, for example, editorials perhaps or commentaries?
I think so. Yeah, that's the like maybe yeah, editorials or commentaries in more the use of course more less technical language, less jargon, and more accessible language. So I think we'll try to do that after we get this published. We've got our reviewers' comments back. They've really given us very good comments, but very technical. Like for instance, how is this different from other development theories that have already talked about critique and imagined alternatives? So we had to articulate that, we're bringing in the affective here, the emotional, together with the mobilization component of it in the context of climate change. So we really had to kind of justify why this notion of radical hope is something new and something different. But yeah, beyond that, we want to move it, to make it a little bit more simpler so that we could reach broader audiences.
Yeah, I love that idea, Justin, because it really goes to the notion of how we can make this knowledge more open, smashing the four walls of the ivory tower of the academe and really bringing this out to, the stakeholders or our publics who we really interact with and do this research for. As you mentioned, no, the research is a performative action. And, we don't necessarily say that as a negative judgment, but rather as a way for us to, I guess, acknowledge that research is never really done in a quote unquote neutral or apolitical lens because we are affected by and we are shaped by the factors that also affect other stakeholders. And so, speaking on what you mentioned on more awareness of radical hope and affect, I want to read this next question from Camille Rose Mendoza. Uh, Thank you for the insightful presentation. I was wondering, drawing from affect and decolonial perspectives, whether participants themselves framed hope through the Filipino concept of pag-asa, which is how we literally translate hope. I'm also curious about how pag-asa may resonate with or differ from broader global north or global south conceptualizations of hope.
Emil, that sounds like one of our reviewers' comments to articulate what is the global south perspective, this thing, global south perspective here. So this is a very difficult question to answer, and I think we haven't, first of all, the paper emerged as a four. It's not like we thought about hope, we thought about radical hope, and then we went in the field and collected data about hope. No. So to answer the question, the Filipino concept of pag-asa, I don't think that was how we designed the study. This was like after all the fieldwork that have been done, we were kind of reflecting. And given the environmental context of what's happening in the country, we're thinking, how can we inspire hope? And so maybe we should conceptualize it into that lens of hope. So it's more of an after fact. We did all the research first, the fieldwork, and then we came back together as a group and then kind of talked about it. And that's how that's how the notion, that's how the lens came in. Now, in terms of how does it differ from the global north and global south context, I think that the context in which this hope emerges is what makes that difference. Because in the south, there's, as you said, there's the notion of colonialism, of marginalization. It's all of these different intersecting crises at the same time, where this notion of hope emerges, right? So I guess that's what makes it different from different movements in the global north, like the Friday for ano yun, rebellion and some things like that. It's quite different context where hope is emerging, and I think that's where the difference lies in terms of how complex, in terms of how messy, in terms of how multifaceted that notion of hope is in the context of global south, because it is entangled with legacies of colonialism. It is entangled with inequality and marginalization. It is entangled with injustices. So all of this combination makes it so, yeah, unique, but also very complex.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I agree that really frames and contextualizes just how complex that is. I also go back to when you were setting the framework for how you define radical hope. You know, you have all of these typologies of hope, all of these typologies of optimism, and then how does that then interact with our local cultural understandings of hope? Because I can imagine how complex the thought process or the conversations between you and your colleagues must have been when you were trying to look at whether you could sort of take a step back and try to define a common definition or framework, or do you want to zoom in rather and really contextualize it? Because both approaches do have their trade-offs. Perhaps you could also speak about that sort of tension that you faced as researchers.
Yeah, it's quite as you know, the different authors are bringing in different disciplinary lens, so it's been a challenge, to be honest. Different case studies, different disciplines. The other authors are telling me you should bring this reading in, you should bring this reading. So yeah, it's been challenging to kind of pull it all together into this piece. But that's the beauty of multidisciplinarity, of interdisciplinarity. You get to learn from other scholars. You get to learn from the readings and from the works that they're citing or that they're using in their text. So I guess that's what makes the piece beautiful. Like all of this diversity and breadth of expertise in there.
Yeah, definitely. It's diverse, it's complicated, but that is where the beauty lies, especially in academia, and especially during these times when we're more aware. I want to say about how there has to be more of that interdisciplinary conversations between the sciences and humanities, between management and the arts, and all of that.
Right.
Okay,
And this has been
so
so fresh to me, Daniel, because I just had a conversation with them like 2 days ago, and they're telling me you should include this reading from anthropology. You should include this. So yeah, that has been so fresh, and yeah, that's why that's reflection.
yeah, that's really very inspiring, and I hope that that's an experience that all of us, can someday experience. So, uh, we have a comment from the chat, and this is from Doc Emma earlier, and I just really want to read it because she also mentions that you can also go on radio shows as a form of that mass communication. And I know that Doc Emma had also recently appeared on a radio show herself to talk about her research. And so, just connecting that to a question from Doc Emma. Thank you. She thanks you for the excellent presentation. And she noticed that in your three key lessons on hope, that the spiritual dimension of hope was not cited. In her talk or discussion with community leaders, their hope for a better future is always associated with their faith in God. Was this something that you and your colleagues had perhaps noted? And then was there, maybe you could comment perhaps on why the three key lessons don't have that spiritual aspect.
Thank you so much, Doc Emma. I mean, this is such an important insight. And I want to be honest, like, we haven't thought about this during this time, but during my fieldwork, like 2 months ago, that's where the spiritual dimension came in. We were asking them about their understanding of resilience and climate resilient development. And suddenly, the kind of the spiritual, the faith component, suddenly it was articulated. So yeah, I think that we should bring it in because that's how the communities actually just recently talked about it. Um, but unfortunately, for this work that based on our fieldwork in the past, that hasn't really surfaced yet. But I think that in the future studies, that should be something that should be looked into.
But maybe you should consider, politics of spirituality and climate action.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Yes po, we will do that.
Okay, thank
And
you.
very timely given our given the time of the year that we're discussing this, which is during Laudato Si week, a very spiritual document on, environmental stewardship. And so uh, I agree that that's also very interesting. Uh, it's also, I guess, a point of reflection as to whether uh, a spirituality lens in the lessons would perhaps either add or take away from that generalizability when you want to, use this framework as well for areas outside of the Philippines, maybe in other Southeast Asian or in fact in other global South contexts, how do we as humans interact with spirituality in different ways? Okay. So I want to move us along to perhaps the second to the last question before we close the open forum, and this is from Sigmund Fletcher Tarayo. And he asks whether if the Haiyan experience and the continuing experience of heavy typhoons in the eastern Visayas have affected community members' hope. And he says that he's thinking of how can they be hopeful or have hope given that typhoons happen over and over again, and therefore this is a certainty of a hazard that cannot be prevented.
Thank you, Simon. So I was with Simon in Tacloban 2 months ago. So it's difficult because, as I said, the the paper is really based on other kind of a retrospective reflection after the fact, right? We didn't come in and say that we want to study people's hope. Like how do they define hope? How do they articulate it? That wasn't the intention of our study when we went into our respective field sites. So it's hard to say whether the continuing experience of typhoons currently has affected people in terms of how people hope, because we don't know in the first place how would you define hope in the first place, and like what is the level of hope now compared to what's the level of hope like 2 or 3 years ago. Unfortunately, we haven't done that, but I think it's a good study to engage in maybe in the future to see how hazards have affected how the people's hope making basically. So I think it's a good study for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. At least, hopefully, that can also inspire perhaps other members of the audience if this is a line of inquiry or research that they want to focus on in the near future. And so, perhaps as a last question, and as a more general question, if members of the audience want to stay updated with the very meaningful work that you are doing, what is the best way that they can stay in touch?
Thanks, Daniel. So I'm very active on social media. So I post my articles in LinkedIn, in Facebook. So those two main avenues, I use them to share some of the articles. I'd let you know because this paper has, and I mean, we really got good feedback from the reviewers. We think hopefully that our revisions would be enough. So in that case, then sometime this year it would be published. So I'll share it with you as soon as I hear from the publishers.
Yes, we wish you the best of luck in that. I know that sometimes, navigating the different comments of reviewers can always be, a very tricky situation. So I wish you and your collaborators all the best in that endeavor. And so thank you as well for your answers, and thank you to our participants for your very engaging questions. This has really contributed to such a lively open forum, and it's hard to believe that those 25 minutes have just flown by. And so we now move to the awarding of the certificate. This is presented to Dr. Justin C. for sharing his time and insights in the webinar entitled Forging Possibilities from Crisis, Radical Hope through Grassroots Action in the Philippines on the 22nd of May, 2026. This certificate is signed by myself as the focal point of the MCR Ateneo Hub and by Dr. Emmanuel De Locado, the director of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. A high-res and signed copy will also be sent to Dr. C after this session. And so thank you very much again, Justin, for sharing your time and insights with us. This has really been such an enriching session. But of course, all good things must also draw to a close. And so to deliver the closing remarks, we now call on Dr. Maria Ines Angela Ponce de Leon, Associate Professor of the Department of Communication at the Ateneo de Manila University and a collaborator of the MCR Ateneo Hub. Dr. Ponce de Leon or Doc Ines, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you to all our participants for being here at this forum. As someone who also did research on Typhoon Haiyan, hi there, Ma'am Emma. Dr. Porio and I were collaborators in this
Hello.
research.
Hi,
I
Ines.
appreciate
Miss you.
Miss you, ma'am. I appreciate, Justin, the work that you've done, and I also appreciate everyone's insights here. Those who work closely with me will know this about me. I always criticize command and control approaches, not only in how we deal with crises in nature, but also how we view the lives of people. And I'm glad that Justin really took the time to nuance and conceptualize the ideas that have often been taken for granted. And people indeed have been taken for granted. They have been defined as those who might not know any better without information, those who must be commanded by information, controlled by information. I completely resonate as well with the critique of if it worked out there, then it will work here. But this keeps as well ignoring the deep roots of our context and how our lives are the product of history, of religion, spirituality, modernity, even colonialism. So yes, colonialism, it doesn't actually muddle the issue. It actually returns it to one of the great ideologies that have driven climate change impacts disproportionately in the developing world. And it is part of our story as people whose stories must first be listened to rather than assumed to fit into a template. I love the treatment of the 4 different case studies, and I wish you all the best in the research because this must continue and more people must know about it. Our communities are truly not defenseless and they are not hopeless. They work with the climate and the environment, sometimes with traditions and responses that teach us more about ourselves. And these stories and traditions and lives cannot be captured by parachuting into a location or assuming we know people's lives or working on assumptions and then putting everything into an equation. As a fellow qualitative researcher, thank you. I'm glad that you're engaging in this research, in participatory work, because it also means empowerment. It means responding to social injustice, and that we must be part of challenging the status quo that has long told people what to do instead of allowed people to speak for themselves, to think for themselves, and to work for themselves. I think this forum has taught us and inspired us all to be part of that radical hope. Not just an optimistic hope, but seeing the fruits of the process and the struggle and acknowledging the reality of these. This is so consistent with how people behave when they are given a voice. When people truly hope, it's because they don't simply sit back and wait for larger institutions to work. They work at making their own local networks create a reality from which we can learn and through which we might be inspired. And they craft their own tomorrow. They make their hope happen. This research world, I agree, is complicated and complex in any context, not just the global south, because our world really is a web of variables that we can only try to describe in patterns, but that we always find in chaos whenever we don't really ask first, rather anticipate. And the work continues in both research and practice. So I hope that everyone, not just in this room, but everyone who will encounter Justin's work will also see the nuance and detail in this kind of research so that we can continue to demand something from our government without forgetting our role in shaping our own lives. Thank you so very much, everyone. Thank you, Justin, for that wonderful talk, and thank you for the great forum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ponce de Leon, Doc Inez. Indeed, it is a sort of hope in itself to see action from the ground, and we are made all the richer for it. It's also always nice to have these interdisciplinary conversations that include not just the main session, but also our opening and closing remarks. And so I just want to note how lucky we are as a hub to be a very diverse and interdisciplinary group. At this point, may we request everyone to please turn your cameras on momentarily for our group photo. This will serve as our documentation for this session. So it's always nice to have the chance to see, all of our participants' faces, or at least as much as we as can be accommodated. So if you are able to turn your cameras on for just a few moments, that would be very appreciated. We fit in a couple of frames, so I'd like to ask for everyone's patience. I'll now be taking the first screenshot in 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, everyone. And now I'll be taking the second page in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. It's always nice to see familiar faces in our sessions. But if this is your first time with us, we hope that you stick around as we go through the rest of our series, especially since our next session is happening in exactly 2 weeks. So on the 5th of June, as we observe World Environment Day. The webinar for the 5th of June is titled Integrating Bottom-Up Approaches into Climate Attribution, Evidence from Amazonia and the Pantanal, with our speaker, Dr. Maria Lucia Barbosa. And so from the Philippines, we will be looking at case studies from across the globe, but also in the Global South. And speaking of the Global South, as part of our commitments to equity and greater inclusion, MCR, as part of the World Climate Research Program, invites you to take this survey by the Global South Inclusion Task Team, of which collaborators from the Ateneo Hub are also part of. This survey is for individuals or anyone who has really participated in at least one event by the World Climate Research Program. And so if you have participated in any of our previous MCR Ateneo events, whether online or on-site, or even if this is your first time with us, you are eligible to answer this survey. It should take approximately 15 to 20 minutes, and we would greatly appreciate your insights as we help to build a WCRP that is inclusive, especially for Global South colleagues. In the meantime, while waiting for our next session on the 5th of June, if you'd like to learn more about the Ateneo Hub, why not visit one of our featured projects? We have built a steady repository of what we call Klimat articles, which is a play on the Filipino phrase climate and, to explore the connections between climate change and the everyday. Every few months, we come out with a new article. Another featured project is the Climate Stories Initiative. We believe that we are all storytellers as well as scientists. And if you have a story about how climate change has impacted you, we are interested in reading it. Together, we hope to build up a Southeast Asian voice that is more than just a compilation of stories, as we also hope to have a series of submissions where risk perception is seen. You may visit the site on screen to access the guide questions and select a few of them as your prompts to structure your submission. And lastly, to our dear participants, please answer the evaluation survey with the QR code and link flashed on screen. We kindly ask that you share your honest insights about the webinar to help us improve our future events. Requests for e-certificates may be coursed through the same form, and these certificates will be released around a week from completion. Thank you very much again to Justin, Dr. C. We would also like to thank our sign language interpreters, Ms. Edna Comia and Ms. Annalisa Regis Tolentino, our sign language interpreters, for making our event more inclusive. And to all of you, thank you very much for your participation in this webinar. We hope that you've gained fresh insights on the nuances of radical hope and why something so intangible is crucial for climate action. Please don't forget to accomplish our event evaluation form and visit the other links that we've posted in the chat. Again, requests for e-certificates will be coursed through the same form. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.